Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Welcome to the show, Jill. Thank you for making the time today and saving me from spreadsheet wrangling. I have been spreadsheet wrangling for about an hour, and I thought, will I get this done before I speak to Jill? And I didn't. But I have to say, speaking with you, what I'm looking forward to sharing with you is going to be much more fun than spreadsheet wrangling. So welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm glad I could help you with that.
So could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Yeah. So my name's Jill Cruz. I live in Colorado, USA, and I am a former foster parent and an adoptive parent of, I have two children. One who we adopted through the foster care system, and one who's a biological child. And I have also spent my career working in the child welfare field, working with foster families and adoptive families and others that engage with families like mine. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm excited too. So before we started recording, you were talking about the fact that we get lost in the mix of doing, I think was your words. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes puts us kind of out of kilter, and we forget about you use this word relational experience and connection. So why did you pick that? Why did you pick that theme? Why do you think that that's a rich area for us to explore?
Yeah, along the way, along my journey, I've had, various aha moments that have kind of led me down a path of, mindfulness and self-discovery around the relational piece that I have with my children and that my children have with me. I think as parents, we oftentimes, it'll come to our mind maybe easier that we think about like, well, how's my child feel about me? Are they connected with me? Do they feel safe? Do they trust me? All of those things. Are they attached? Yeah, especially when we've adopted them. I think that's even a more prominent thought that we have. And all of those things are really important. But sometimes I think what we forget about is that connection and that we have with our kids is just as much about us as parents as it is about our children. So it's just as important for us to bond with them and to connect with them and to be, understanding of what our experience is of building that connection as it is for us to understand their experience. And I think it's really easy for us to forget that. And then as time goes on, we get going and we're doing things, right? We're making sure everybody's got everything taken care of. And we're worried about school and grades, and we're worried about friendships and for our kids, and we're worried about like all these other things. And sometimes I think we neglect to think about our own experience of that relationship and how much that impacts the relationship itself.
So I'm delighted to use the word aha moments, because that we live in a world that seems to be obsessed with strategies. Because it's easy to it's a lot easier to strategy dump than it is to have an insight. We're kind of it's all about the strategy. It's all about techniques. It's all about behavior. It's all about trauma understanding. It's all about it just kind of keeps on going. So could you share one of those aha moments?
Yeah,
because that's what I want to do with the show, really. I want to share people's aha moments in the hope that it catalyzes some aha moments in the listener's head, so that they move along their learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. So along the way of my career, I have done a lot of facilitation of training for families who are caring for children who've had really tough stuff in their history. Kids who've come into foster care, kids who've been adopted, kids who have traumatic histories. And the training was strategies, was a piece of it. But another really big piece of it was about the relational component and was about, mindfulness and how each person in that relationship can have some awareness and mindfulness of their experience. And so within the context of facilitating that training, my colleague and friend, who I was co-facilitating with, shared a story about her experience with the attachment process with her adopted daughter. And essentially the crux of it was that she had this moment when she was working with a therapist around attachment. She had this moment where she was looking at her daughter and she realized, I have never had the opportunity to see her from this angle, from in this light, because everything has always been about, what do I need to do for her? How do I need to care for her? How is she attaching to me? And not necessarily thinking about, what is my experience with her? And this story is, and I'm trying to be respectful and not, this is her story, not my story. So so I want to be cautious about what I put out there about her story. But essentially she was trying to, the therapeutic process in that session was seeing if her daughter could fall asleep in her arms. And it took a while, but eventually her daughter did fall asleep in her arms, and her daughter was about 4 at the time. And she looked down and she looked at her daughter's face and she started crying. And the therapist said, well, tell me about that. What's going on for you? And she said, I've never seen her face from this angle in this peaceful state, because she didn't get those opportunities, those moments to like go check in on her when she was sleeping, because her daughter was on high alert a lot. And so she would wake up if anybody came into her room. And it was just this recognition of if you think about like her daughter came to her when she was already a toddler. So she didn't have those moments of like holding her in her arms as an infant and looking at her and rocking her and that kind of thing. And then didn't have the opportunity to go in and watch her while she sleeps, which I think a lot of us as parents, we have those moments where we'll just creep in their rooms and look at them and like, oh, look at my angel, they're sleeping. And she just realized in that moment, she's like, I've never been able to see her from this angle. I've never seen this peacefulness in her. And she said as she was telling that story, she said, it was in that moment that I realized that my bonding with her and my experience of building this relationship with her is just as important as her attaching with me. And when my colleague shared that story, I had this huge light bulb moment that went off in my head, thinking about my own child and my son. And although he came to us as a baby, as an infant, he was very colicky, very, very difficult to soothe. And he did not express any joy or any kind of peacefulness until he was probably about 8 months old. So our experience of caring for him was very stressful. At times it was stressful, it was frustrating. At times I felt irritated with him, and even sometimes, to be perfectly honest, kind of angry. Like, why won't he calm down? Why can't I get him to calm down? And a big reason for that was his in utero history. He had been exposed to drugs and probably other things in utero. And, when she told this story, my son was, oh, at that time he was probably in like elementary school or primary school, I think is maybe how you refer to it in the UK.
How old
And
is he?
I'm sorry,
How old is he?
how old is he now?
No, how old was he when you had this moment?
Oh, he was in elementary school. So he was probably like maybe 8 or 9, and we had him from the time he was an infant. And I had never had this realization, but when she told this story, I had this huge aha, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I never had this experience of like looking at him as this is my precious baby, this is my precious boy, and falling in love with him and experiencing that relationship and that process of attaching and bonding from a place of warmth and calm and joy and success, to be perfectly honest. And so when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, so now, now when he's older, at the time when he was like 8 or 9, I realized how that translates into how I arrive with him in that relationship in different moments in time. So when he's upset or he's struggling, and this is true even today, that is still something I'm working on. When he's struggling, when he needs me, when he's frustrated, when he's upset, my initial immediate just kind of raw blueprinted response to him is this feeling of, "Ugh, what now?" Or frustration or irritation. And in order for me, and that's definitely harkens back to that time during the early first few years that we had him, is because that was my experience. That's what I was feeling most of the time when he was little. And so when I realized that, I was like, first of all, it's not his fault. So it's my job to work on that for me on my side. And some of that work would involve him, like doing things to kind of recreate those experiences now that he's older. But it is my job to work on that so that when I arrive in relationship, I can arrive from a place of, you are my precious boy, and I am here for you. And that's not an easy thing to say. It just doesn't come naturally because of the experience that I had when he was really young. And don't get me wrong, he is my precious boy and I love him dearly. But because of that blueprinting, that I call it blueprinting of the relationship and how we built it from the very beginning, and how the experience of it for me is that experience for me has an impact on how I emotionally respond when things get tough or when he needs me. And so I literally have to say sometimes when I am going toward him, or trying to help him, or he has experience, if that comes up in me of that feeling of frustration or irritation, or taking this big sigh, like, oh, now what? Then I have to literally think in my brain, this is your precious boy, and remind myself how I need to arrive. And that's really hard. And I think that's a reality that probably many of us adoptive families, adoptive caregivers face, is that whether our child came to us as an infant or they came to us as an older child, a lot of our kids have a lot of challenges and a lot of needs that are really difficult. And so our experiences of growing that relationship with our child is sometimes filled with difficulty and frustration because of everything our child has been through. And I think sometimes we forget to think about how that affects us emotionally within the context of that relationship. And the first step of it is acknowledging it and recognizing it, and then trying to create opportunities for other experiences.
Wow.
I would say that's probably one of the biggest ahas that
Yeah.
I've had.
See, I've had a couple of moments like that.
Mm,
I had one on a Zoom call
mhm,
with a lady called Shireen from Egypt, and I was training her. I was training her, and I was training her in an approach that I use with kids, and I use kids about their, their their actions, the feelings that lead to their actions, the thoughts that lead to the feelings that lead to the actions,
mhm,
and who they truly are
mhm,
underneath all that. Right? And we were talking. I was asking her about her love for her child
mhm,
and her love for herself, and we fell into a bath of love together.
mm,
Now, I used to think that love was like holding your hands, right? Love was holding hands. It was a connection.
mhm,
Whereas this love was like a bath of love. It was a space rather than a connection.
mhm,
And in that space, we were in that space of love together. We were in a space of love. Sorry, you know that I don't mean romantic love, don't you?
I do know that,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And in that space, I saw her completely differently.
Mm,
Like I saw her for the first time, really.
mhm,
Like your friend saw her daughter in that angle from the next line, and she actually, my view of her changed because I saw who the essence of who she was. I saw her as love from a place of love. I saw her as love. I saw her um, radiating and and in touch with her essence and herself as love, and has and her daughter as love too. So it's an experience, and we talk about falling in love, but this is kind of like, this isn't romantic love. This is kind of really, it's just it's a space, not a connection. It's a
mm,
and I've had that about I've had it again about myself. So I went into I was going to a meeting, um, and it was a kind of like a training, a bit of a training, a bit of a top up, yeah. And they showed they had a slideshow running on the projector, and it showed pictures of the people of different groups who had been through the core training over the years, and as I walked into this room, my group of 8 people appeared on the projector, and I just started crying
mhm,
about how far I'd come in that week's training that I did, and how far I'd come from since that training. And it was a feeling. It was the feeling of being, on one level, it was the feeling of being enough,
mm,
and another level, it was a feeling of deep and utter connection of love, like connection with who I truly am. That kind of like, so I talk about we're we're human beings having a spirit. Sorry, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. That's what I mean by the essence of our spirit. And it's a really quiet, peaceful, deep, profound spot. And I ain't touched it very often. I'm too busy, I started the conversation with you talking about spreadsheets. You know what I mean, I've been spreadsheet. You're a mum, so you've got all this stuff going on. You're telling me about holiday and having to reschedule it, and it's like almost what's going on. And we as human beings, we just we've got so much on. We've got so much going on in our head. We've got so much beating up. We've got so much worrying about the future. We've got so much. We lose the love that we are.
Yeah. I agree. I appreciate that. As you were talking about kind of just this, what you said about we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I love that. I love that way of thinking about it. And what you were saying about like having these moments where you can be completely authentically you, and just be in that space of just this real raw love and engagement even with other people. I mean, what came to my mind, honestly, as you were talking about this, and as you were talking about like how busy we are and everything, think about, like, for me, what came to my mind is like an exhale of like letting everything else fall away, letting the busyness and what we have to do and who we think we need to be, and the expectations that we have for ourselves and the expectations that we have for other people in our lives, and the things that, like, the historical things that get in the way of just being truly present 100% in that moment, and just exhaling all of that away and just being in that, as you say, love, being in that space of love with one another, and really honoring the amazingness of our being and of our just who we are in everything, all of our everything, our good parts, our bad parts. I mean, because I think there's so much beauty in all of us, and I think everything else that's going on all the time around us clouds that. And I think, that's true for caregiving and being a parent, whether you're parenting a biological child or a foster child or an adopted child or what have you. It's very easy for everything else to cloud the picture, right? And if we can just let that fall away and exhale that out and just be 100% present in that space with each other. I mean, gosh, if I could have that experience on a daily basis, I can't even imagine how fulfilled I would feel and how amazing my life would be. But it's easy to forget how important that is.
So a few metaphors came to my mind on this. The first one was they're all kind of landscaping metaphors. So the first one that came to my mind was the choppy water. So you were talking about going to the beach. I was talking about going to the beach. Mm-hmm. So a beach, the water's all choppy on the surface, but then right down at the bottom of the seabed, it's the calm. Mm. And we're focused on that. We're focused on the choppy stuff.
Yeah.
top, you know, the waves crashing in, you know. And the other thing that as I'm thinking about this, like, I'm not a surfer. I'm really not very agile or coordinated. I tried windsurfing once, but you know, we go looking for the waves. You know, surfers
Yeah.
go looking for the waves, right? Um, and divers go looking for the deep. Oh, here's one. So those people, the people, Richard and Liz, who ran the training, where I found myself crying going into the room, looking at a picture of myself and realizing how far I'd come, and you know, that essentially that it was a feeling of I'm enough.
Mm.
I'm enough. But, you know, that's I'm enough, and then and then and and then no, I'm more than enough. I'm perfect. I'm the whole universe. You know. Anyway, and we all are. This isn't a modesty thing, right? This isn't a Simon Van thing. And so yeah, they talk about, like, who finds. Richard talks about, you know, who finds more pearls, the pearl diver or the
Mhm.
bus driver. The pearl diver has to go looking for the pearls, and the pearls are in the peace and the calm at the bottom of the bottom of the seabed. Yet we're fixated on the waves at the top,
Mhm.
and that translates the to the spiritual being having the human experience. All our focus is on that human experience bit, and that's the day to day. That's the contact sport that is life.
Mhm.
That's the choppy water at the surface, and the spiritual being is the calm can
Mhm.
at the bottom of the seabed. So that was the first one that came to mind. The next one, the next one was the tornado, right?
Mm.
But with a calm, the eye of the tornado. The eye of the tornado is the calm.
Yeah.
That's the love, and yet our focus is on all the 90 million miles an hour stuff that's going running around. And then when you said about the clouds, or clouded over, you've heard. I mean, I think this is a Buddhist one. You know, like, where we're focused, like, we're obsessed by the weather. We're looking at the clouds, and we're forgetting that we're the sky.
Mm.
So it's a matter of perspective. And
Yeah.
again, the clouds are the human experience. The sky is the spiritual essence, the
Mm.
love that we truly are.
Yeah. And it's something that I think it's, having conversations like this is a really wonderful way to remind ourselves about, you know, go diving for the pearl, and, try to be in the space of, like, the center of the tornado, and being present with each other, and being, purposeful about having that really authentic opportunity to be together and honor each other in relationships. And that's hard to do. And I think the more technology we get and the more busy we get, the harder that is to slow down and think about that. And, sometimes we think, well, oh, I came home from work and we sat on the couch and we watched TV together for 2 hours. But the difference between spending 2 hours watching TV and spending 5 minutes of truly being present in and in this space of love with somebody else, I mean, there's a huge difference between that and the way that the experience of that 5 authentic minutes can help, that can help really nurture our relationships and our capacity to truly connect and love each other, um, is priceless. I don't get that from 2 hours of sitting on the couch watching TV. That's just filling space to some extent, you know? Um, so it's a reminder, this conversation is another reminder to me, to be purposeful about having those opportunities to dive for the pearl.
Yeah.
And then I think what happens is when we focus on doing those things, you know, just kind of take this back to our, you know, our experience as caregivers and as parents, and the experience that our children would have if we were to focus on being purposeful about having those opportunities for that truly present, authentic connection with one another. How many pieces of the challenges that we have, right? The behaviors, all of the things that we do all the time, right? And all the things we do to address different things that are going on. Well, if we are really building that space of acknowledging and recognizing and supporting this idea that we are all enough, we are all more than enough, how that could translate into, we're doing less of the, you're doing this behavior, you're doing that behavior, I need to correct this, I need to use this tool. So kind of how you were talking in the beginning about, you know, not focusing so much on, you know, all the skills and all the, like, this is what you do when, and this is the tool, and we're going to train you to do this. But if we actually put some focus, more focus on being spiritually present with each other on a regular basis, how we may not have the need to do some of those other skills and tools as often.
Yeah. But it starts with us, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Talking about this, did recorded a podcast earlier today with an adoption lawyer from Florida, and yeah, we touched on this. Like, perfection thing is the thing, you know. Perfection, perfect with our imperfections. Seeing ourselves not as a kind of, not as all of us, as for me, or for all of us, seeing ourselves as perfect in our perfections, and the fact that the kids aren't their trauma. People talk about it's. People talk about, you know, me. I heard people talking about this, like, adoption is part of a story. A part of adoption is part of who we are. And I've heard this from an adopted parent earlier today, actually. And adoption is not a part of who I am. It's just something that happened to me. You know, trauma isn't part of who we are. It's behavior, passing behavior, kind of comes and goes. It's aggressive feelings. It's terrible thoughts. But all that stuff comes and goes. And it's not, you know, like, I think a lot about a lot about the meanings of words. So like people use this word essential, right? So it's not our essence. If our essence is love, then trauma is something that it is a, what do they call it, a veil, a veil over the truth of who we are, not who we are. So
Right.
you know, spiritual being having a human experience, spiritual being, no trauma, human experience, trauma. Focus on the spiritual being bit, not the trauma bit, not the human experience. I say this a lot. Trauma informed, hope obsessed. Trauma informed, love obsessed. Not trauma obsessed.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I think about that as, my professional realm of, kind of working in this world throughout my career, something that we've become very purposeful about is our language and how we speak about the families and the children and youth that we work with. And kind of this idea about, I mean, even as simple as the word placement communicates different things, right? So a traumatized child, as opposed to a child who has experienced trauma, right? A child, let's see, so well, let's just stick with that, like a traumatized child versus a child who's experienced trauma. When we say a traumatized child, it puts the trauma in front of the person, right? It's saying your experience of trauma is actually more who you are than you as a person, right? And I know it's easy to get tangled up in like linguistics, and I think there's a lot of things in the world where we have to be mindful of the words that we use. But I think in this space with so many of us and our kids who have had experiences of trauma, if we're thinking about it from the lens of traumatized child, we are more likely to focus in on that trauma than we are on the essence of who that child is, like you say. And I think so, even something like that, of thinking about, you are not your trauma. You are not the things that have happened to you. You are you. And while those things that have happened to you have impacted maybe the way you've gone along in your life and how you've grown and developed who you are, and how you arrive and experience the world, it's still not who you are. Like you said, adoption is not part of me. Adoption is not, being adopted is not who you are. It's part of your story, but it's not the core of who you are. And I think it's easy to forget that, especially when we kind of day in and day out are caring for or working with kids who've had things happen to them. And it's easy to not see behind that veil, as you say.
Yeah. Traumatized child. That's like, it feels like a real doom laden, permanent, broken thing. And there's a lot of rhetoric that comes on this. I've talked about it. I don't know if I talked to you about it, but I'm sharing it so much, right? I didn't think I was wounded until I read The Primal Wound.
Mm.
And I'm a sensitive guy, so I took that on. And it took me down.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized it wasn't true, because this is kind of one of my lines, and I sometimes think it's so, to me, it's got real depth, but it sounds really flip. You can't wound spirit.
Mm.
But wounds happen to bodies,
Mm.
but when we're not our body.
Yeah, there's so much more.
With a spirit that animates the body. So whenever I say that, I think that sounds too philosophical, and it means something to you, Simon, but really, does it mean anything to the person I'm talking about? Does that mean anything to you, Jill?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have depth beyond the physiological.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how I think about it. And it's kind of, and I think about that in the context of this, being spiritual beings, having human experiences, is that if we didn't have that depth, and if we didn't have the spiritual piece of us, then would we need each other? Would we have those experiences of really kind of being in that space of love together and really honoring the depth of who we are and the spirituality of who we are, and that we are enough and we're more than enough, and that there's so much more than just the humanity or the human piece. And I feel like if we didn't have, like, if I think about it, I feel like we didn't have that depth or that spirituality, like, would we just all be wandering around independently and just going about our lives without context or without the need to be together? And I feel like the part of the human experience that is so precious and amazing is the spiritual piece and that connection piece.
When can you think of a time when that has become real for you, when you felt that, a felt experience?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure that this is what you're getting at, but the thing that's coming into my mind is an experience that I had with my son when he was probably 11, 12-ish, maybe a little younger than that. When I would travel, and this is still true, and was true even before this experience that I had, but when I would travel, he would get very upset and very distraught and very, big tears, and it was just very difficult for him. And he started this pattern of behavior where he was stealing my makeup, and I'm not a big makeup person, but it was like, why is he stealing my things, right? What is he doing with the mascara? What is he doing with the eyeliner? This doesn't make any sense. Is he doing artwork? Like, why does he think he needs to take this from me? And I would get mad at him, and I would, discipline him for taking my things. And it happened like 2 or 3 times before I recognized that it would always precede when I was going to travel. for work and when I was going to be gone. And so I started thinking about that. What is this about? This isn't about the thing. This isn't about the stuff. What's the why behind this behavior? And I kind of came to this space of recognizing that it's always been super, super difficult for him when I travel. And I think that goes back to his initial abandonment that he experienced with his birth mom being left and her not coming back. And so when I realized that, and he had taken, the next time he took my makeup before I was going to travel, I went and I sat in front of him so that we were eye to eye. And I said, buddy, I know you took my makeup again, right? And he's like, yeah, I did. And I looked him right in the eye and I said, buddy, did you take my makeup because you feel like if you have something of mine that I will come back? And he said, yeah. And I looked at him and I said, I will always, always come back for you because you are what matters. And that moment of seeing him recognize, like, first of all, kind of this release of like, okay, I'm going to be okay. And him, I feel like, I can't speak for him because I'm not him, but what registered for me in that emotional, spiritual space was him recognizing that I see him. And it's not about the stuff. It's not about all the waves on the surface. It's about the deep. It's about his spiritual being and the just amazingness of who he is and how deeply and desperately I love him, and reassuring him. And it was that experience. And it was that conversation, and it wasn't just words. I was very present and it was a very emotional conversation that we had. Not that we were crying or but we were spiritually connected in that moment. And it was that experience that I feel like made him truly believe that was the case, that I really would come back and that I was not going to abandon him. And then we started drawing hearts on each other's hands before I would leave, to remind him that, we have each other's hearts. And excuse me, to this day, sorry, to this day, when I travel, he will show me, he'll say, Mom, I still have the heart. And he's 15 now. And he will actually color it back in. So like if he washes his hands and it fades, he'll take the Sharpie and color it back in to make sure. But I'm not sure if that was an example that you were asking for, but that was what came to mind for me.
Yeah. I was about to give you one of my stories on this subject, but yours was far more beautiful. I've had that. I've had that feeling I've had that feeling a few times. I actually have that feeling. This is a bit bonkers, really, but I'm explaining. I guess I'm showing it because, like, the more you can see it, the more you can look for it. The pearl finder. I've had that experience at I've had that experience at rugby matches. When they sing that we like when England play Scotland, and Scotland, the different countries within the UK play each other at rugby. We sing, each team sings its national anthem, right? And in that space, I'm just such a softie. I'm crying, and usually it's my wife's Scottish, I'm English. We don't go to see Scotland, England, because the rivalry between the two is just doesn't work. And it's not a good atmosphere. But we go to see Scotland, Wales, or Scotland, France. So I'm not rooting for either team, but I'm lost in the connection of the national anthem, and everybody's together, well, half of the pitch are together, half of the crowd are together for the Scottish one, and the other half are together for the French. But it doesn't matter that I get the goose pimples on the back. But there was a time about 3 weeks before my dad died, 4 years ago, when he was asking me about the stuff that I was doing with kids. He said, "Have you, how's it going?" I said, "Well, I'm not getting. It's still working great with the kids, Dad, but I haven't figured out a way to make it scale and da da da." And he said, "But I haven't got started really." And 18 months ago, he'd been trying to say, "Look, enough's enough, Simon. If you nobody's going to think anything bad of you if you kind of like walk away from this stuff." But with kind of like once he'd got this cancer diagnosis that he had a few weeks and months left to live, he was more in touch with his spiritual side, and he asked me how I was doing, and I said, "I haven't got it sorted yet, Dad, but to be honest, I haven't really got started." And he reached out and he touched my hand and he said, "That's my boy." And it was that moment of connection. It was that bath of love that you had with your son. And I remember you sharing that story about the makeup when we had a chat last month before we agreed to do the podcast. And I wonder if we could just create a few more of those in the day.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be this big, grand event, even. It can be simple.
Yeah. I've got a friend who's just thrown another surprise party for his wife. And to be honest, she'd be more surprised if there wasn't a surprise party. It's who we are. It's that place of love. And what a lovely conversation we've had on this.
Yeah.
But I never knew we were going to go this way.
No, maybe we've had our own spiritual experience.
Yeah. And hopefully the listeners have had too.
Yeah.
I guess if they're still listening, they've maybe had something. The ones that thought we were nuts, they're long gone anyway. So
that's okay. They're just not ready.
Okay. They're just not ready. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. So check out, I'm going to put a link in to Jill's social and website and stuff underneath, and look at what she's doing, because clearly she's coming from a huge space of love. She is love, and you should she's got that lived experience, and she's doing this professionally as well. And these people, they're the people that move the needle.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Simon. That's been wonderful.
You're a star. Thanks for listening, listeners. See you again soon.